Prime Minister hardens his line on ISIS families trying to leave Syria. But is more going on behind the scenes than we're being told? Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke joins us this morning as the government navigates political landmines and its obligations to Australian citizens. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. Finally left, passports in hand after 7 years in a Syrian camp. But 50 kilometres down the road, the journey stopped. Australian family members of ISIS fighters were turned back. Now they're stuck again, and so's the government. Tough talk on one hand about not lifting a finger to help these women and children, while on the other, an obligation to Australian citizens. The political message is clear, legally it's more complicated. The New Look coalition team leapt on the issue, keen to show it can focus on something other than itself, while Pauline Hanson once again went much further. But her comments about Muslims didn't just cause political backlash, they're now being examined by the federal police.
Just calm, stay calm.
ISIS brides looking to come home.
Leaving a camp in Syria for Australia have been turned around.
You make your bed, you lie in it.
These are individuals who chose to associate with a terrorist caliphate.
I think it's unfortunate that children are caught up in this.
While coalition and Labor governments have repatriated Australians from Syria in the past, the political climate has shifted.
We want to make sure that Australians are kept safe.
This is not aligned with the values we as Australians believe in.
Completely contrary to Australian values.
Well, we are doing nothing to repatriate or to assist these people.
I'm going to do something really unparliamentary and I'm going to call bullshit on this Prime Minister. You are lying to the Australian people.
Some of the government statements here have been misleading in the past. They have actually met with people that have discussed these ISIS brides returning.
We're providing no assistance to these people and won't provide any assistance to these people.
You are assisting these women and their children who turned their back on Australia to come back here.
But we won't breach Australian law.
They can't say, oh, hands off if they come back. What can we do?
If they are able to return to Australia,
we will implement the law to its fullest capacity that we can.
Their religion concerns me. Well, I'm sorry. How can you tell me there are good Muslims?
Well, I know many good Muslims.
Senator Hanson's been the queen of the xenophobic scapegoating rodeo.
She's not fit to lead a major political party.
If I've offended anyone out there that doesn't believe in Sharia law or multiple marriages or wants to bring the ISIS brides in, then I apologise to you.
None of us should be shocked by that. That is their MO.
Breaking this afternoon, the government has temporarily banned one of the so-called ISIS brides.
The opposition wants a guarantee that the rest of the group will not be permitted to enter Australia.
Well, I think they should look at the laws they voted for.
If they want to change those laws, then let's work to do so.
These are Australian citizens.
I have nothing but contempt for these people.
Any citizen has a right to return.
Why have some of these people received passports?
If anyone applies for a passport as a citizen, they are issued with a passport.
People who want to bring the hate and violence from another part of the world to our shores should see a shut door.
Goodbye.
And we're joined this morning by Niki Savva, author and columnist with the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, Charles Croucher, 9 News' political editor, and Patricia Karvelas, host of Afternoon Briefing and Politics Now on the ABC. Welcome to you all. I want to start with Pauline Hanson here, actually, before we get to the issue around the ISIS families. Niki, we've seen the rise and rise of One Nation over the last few months. And we've heard from particularly some in the coalition that, Pauline Hanson and One Nation have mellowed since the 1990s when they first emerged. But do these comments from Pauline Hanson about Muslims this week show us that some things just haven't changed?
Well, I don't see what those mellowing comments were based on. What she said during the week about Muslims was highly offensive. It was inaccurate, it was bigoted, it was every other kind of adjective that you care to use. And I think that has made life even more difficult for the Liberal Party than before in the way they respond to One Nation. And I think if there are any signs at all from the Liberal Party that they either excuse or appease or imitate One Nation, then they're done for. And this is a very live debate inside the Liberal Party at the moment. And in my view, if they do not put One Nation last on their ballot papers, they are signing their own death warrant.
Okay, well this is a live debate because we've got a by-election, Charles, coming up. At some point you would think in the next couple of months or few months in Susan Lee's former seat of Farrer, where One Nation will be wanting to put in a good show. They're polling really strongly. What's going on in the Liberal Party about whether to preference them or not in the by-election?
Well, and a South Australian election too, right?
Yeah.
It might be even sooner, and that's one of the big challenges because
March 21.
Yeah, and there's a real possibility there when you look at some of the breakdowns, not so much the lower house, but the upper house, where you could start to see 2, potentially 3 One Nation members get elected, and that makes a whole different pathway and becomes almost the litmus test for what would happen at a federal election a bit later on. Niki was right in what she said; it was incorrect. Like what Pauline Hanson said was factually wrong, and everyone increasingly knows or is or lives next door or plays cricket or football or serves in the Defence Forces with someone that is a Muslim. And so the problem is that so much of what Senator Hanson's rise and the rise of One Nation has been about, mirroring reform, mirroring Donald Trump, is grievances and being able to accurately articulate the grievances of Australian voters that are genuinely felt. What we heard there was Pauline Hanson accurately articulating her own grievance, and that's a difference, and that's one of the challenges for the Liberal Party. Go back to your question, are you playing into the grievances of one person or into the community, into a larger block of voters? And that becomes electorally fraught.
The coalition, it must be said, were condemning Pauline Hanson this week. This was, they followed them on One Nation on a few things, but not this. There was a line in the sand. They were very critical of Pauline Hanson making these remarks. Even the conservative elements of the coalition were quick to do that. And for Barnaby Joyce, the new recruit for One Nation, PK, you interviewed him the other day. How awkward is this for him?
For Barnaby Joyce, this is territory he's so uncomfortable on. I think it's well known that Barnaby Joyce is not really a race guy, right? Like he's not really built his career. In fact, on the contrary, he's built his career, David, on sometimes, remember with him with the Biloela family, he was out there, pushing for them to stay in Australia outside of many of the other colleagues he had in the party. So he has historically and consistently not been a racist. And now he's in a party that trades on race. That's what that party is. Now, when he went into One Nation, I know he had conversations with Pauline Hanson where he made it quite clear to her that he would not be going hard on race like she does. But now he's in a situation where she's said something so extreme, and mirroring your comments, it's so extreme. We've normalised such extreme language in this country and around the world that we need to always make the point about just how extreme it is to say that there are no good Muslims. That is just so inflammatory and so obviously wrong, but so deeply offensive to people and also not true. So he now has to distance himself from Pauline Hanson, which he's tried to do, but to do it in a way that means he's not disendorsed so they don't have a massive fight before he becomes the candidate.
Tricky.
That's very tricky for him. And he's tried to do it. I don't know how well he's done it.
On the ISIS families, it's notable, I think, that both the Coalition and Labor have really hardened their language. Under the Morrison government, there were quite a few who came back. But now the line is we're going to shut the door. And the Prime Minister too, Niki, his language has toughened as well. He has contempt for them, he said. What's that hardening all about?
Well, I think One Nation is actually infecting this whole debate. And I think Labor would be very worried about any signs of weakness that people might think they might be showing. So they're taking a very, very tough line. But they cannot stop these women from returning if they are Australian citizens and if they have travel documents. What they can do if these women have committed a crime, and that's a big if in some of these cases, they can arrest them as soon as they land at the airport. So why don't they follow through with that process? I mean, I'm a bit uncomfortable with some of this stuff, because I think there probably are women there who haven't committed a crime. Their children certainly haven't committed a crime. So what are we going to do as a government and as a people? Are we going to punish them for the rest of their lives?
Well, we'll come back to this conversation after we've heard from the Minister. Time to talk to Tony Burke, but before we get to our questions on the government's handling of the ISIS families, the opposition leader also spent the week piling on questions of his own.
Temporary exclusion orders are there to deal with exactly this situation. There are powers to refuse passports, and the government has not answered the most basic questions about why those things are not being used, or to what extent they have sought to use them. We just don't have the answers.
Tony Burke, welcome to the program.
Hi, David.
So on the passports, was it possible to deny passports to these women and children?
Under Australian law, if you're a citizen and you apply for a passport, you get a passport. I've heard the opposition claim, oh, there's this clause or that clause. Anything would have to be under ASIO advice. Of course, if our intelligence agencies said that different parts of the Passports Act had been activated, then we would respond to that if they had intelligence to that effect. But the claims from the opposition that somehow the standard right for any citizen to have a passport has been suspended here is just plain wrong, and they know that.
Well, the Passport Act is pretty clear that a passport can be denied if someone might prejudice the security of Australia. So are you saying there was no advice from ASIO that any of these people prejudiced the security of Australia?
There's been no advice from ASIO that the Passports Act provisions have been activated. There has been advice for one of the people that has come to me that the threshold for a temporary exclusion order has been activated, and I have acted on that and issued the temporary exclusion order. One of my concerns with how the opposition have handled this is they've effectively said the minister should be able to make it up. Michaelia Cash did a long media release saying, oh, this is all the minister needs to do, as though somehow in a national security portfolio you should ignore your national security, intelligence and law enforcement agencies. Anyone who has that sort of view is not fit to handle the nation's security.
Okay, well, a couple of things you've just said there. Just to be clear, the one person who's been issued a temporary exclusion order, there was ASIO advice to do that, you've said, but there was no ASIO advice that there was any problem giving a passport. Can you just explain to people why, if there's no advice that this person presents a security threat to Australia, they get a passport, there is then advice saying they should get a temporary exclusion order. Why give the passport and then slap the ban on?
You're dealing with different legal thresholds.
Right.
I'm not going to be able to give you chapter and verse of every provision, but ASIO is an agency that is very conscious of the specifics of its legislative responsibilities.
So they're fine with giving the passport, but then there's a lower threshold that's been hit.
A different threshold, yes.
Okay, so that might confuse people. It's a level of risk, but not the highest level of risk posed by this person.
Well, the threshold for a temporary exclusion order is by definition a lower threshold, because it's not a permanent decision. It's something that's very much time limited. Right. A minister, even when a temporary exclusion order is in place, if someone seeks a permit, is obliged to do it. You can put conditions around that permit, but the concept of a permit itself is something that you're then legally obliged to provide. So even though a temporary exclusion order officially lasts for 2 years, if someone seeks a permit during that time, and you'd presume they will, the longest you can keep someone out under the permit is 12 months.
Okay, I understand that. Were this entire group of 34 interviewed at any stage by any Australian official before deciding to give them passports?
Oh, look, I'm not going to go through anything that our intelligence agencies do. We certainly had people on the ground in the camps way back in 2022 when there was a repatriation being organised for a very limited group of people. So there have been times when there have been Australian officials on the ground, but it's quite some time since that's been the case.
Okay, and back then in 2022, were they all interviewed?
As I say, I'm not going to go through everything that our intelligence agencies do, but I can put it in these terms. The cohort is not consistent. There are very different people within that cohort with different histories and different states of mind, if I put it in those terms. They are quite different, but our agencies have been following them and following them for a long time. The fact that one person has been pulled out for saying that person meets the threshold for a temporary exclusion order is because, quite specifically, of what we know about that individual.
Okay, but appreciate they're all a little different in their level of risk.
Well, more than a little different.
Yeah, okay. But none of them, by the sounds of it, have been interviewed prior to issuing them passports. Now, issuing them passports, as you've...
Well, it depends what you say by prior. Like in 2022, we had people on the ground there. So the process...
But were they interviewed? You're not able to say?
Well, if you've got people on the ground and that's when DNA checks were done and things like that, then obviously people were being spoken to at the time.
So the Australian community
I'm not going to go through specifically what certain agencies do, but I can give the complete confidence to the Australian community. We know the different individuals. We know the state of mind and the effective ideology of different individuals. They are not a coherent cohort, and that is why the person where a temporary exclusion order has been issued is in a different category to other members of that group.
And just because, again, this has been a question during the week, why just that one? You're saying that she presents a higher level of risk than the rest?
That's right. That's right. That's how you meet the threshold. We never stop collecting information on people.
So more could be issued?
We never stop collecting information on people. If the agencies decide it's in the interest of public safety, given what we continue to find out, for any additional orders to be issued, they'd be issued straight away. Yeah, unlike my opponents, I take the advice of these agencies really seriously. These are people who have dedicated their entire professional lives to keeping Australians safe. Their advice matters. The moment their advice came to me on this one person, I worked through it and the temporary exclusion order was issued.
Why can't they go and interview them? I mean, from what you're saying, it sounds like they're monitoring their communications and collecting what information they can. Wouldn't it be better to sit down with each of them before giving them a passport to come home?
Well, at the moment, we're not sending officials in there.
But why not? Because if there's a risk of them coming back and they do pose any sort of risk, wouldn't it be better to send a...
I think I've just gone through the extent to which we have knowledge of these individuals.
But not interviewing them. Like, why not interview them?
Well, we had people there on the ground earlier. We have continued to track these individuals the whole way through. I appreciate the line of questioning, but I think your presumption there is that you're saying there's a gap in our information, and what I'm telling you is our information is very strong. Okay. That's how you can single one person out from the others.
And on the point of issuing these temporary exclusion orders on ASIO advice, doesn't the Act also give you the power to do that without ASIO's advice?
Well, you need to remember that under the Act, it has to be based on fact, because anything the Minister does is then reviewed by a retired judge. Now, it's not just any retired judge. They've got to be retired High Court, Federal Court or State or Territory Supreme Court. If you've just made it up, which is what the Shadow Attorney General has suggested that I do, then it'll go to a retired judge. They'll say, well, clearly this isn't based on intelligence in either of the two meanings of the word, and it'll be thrown out.
So neither you nor ASIO has concluded that the 33 who didn't get a temporary exclusion
meet the threshold.
Meet the threshold and therefore pose a threat to Australia?
That's right. I mean, if at any point the agencies decide that a further brief should come to me, I would deal with that immediately. And I think the record shows how seriously I take the advice of those agencies. Right now,
sitting here,
nothing further has been presented to me.
They don't pose a threat to Australia?
On the information that we have, The best way to protect Australians has not involved any further temporary exclusion orders.
They don't pose a threat to Australia.
That's right. You need to make sure you've got the best way of protecting Australians. That's what our agencies do.
Are you actively trying to stop them coming back then?
Oh, we don't want them to come back.
No, but are you actively trying to stop them?
We're actively making sure we do nothing to help them. Nothing to help them at all. The only reason they are in...
Nothing to stop them is the question?
I beg your pardon?
Nothing to stop them coming
Well, you can't... other than a temporary exclusion order, there isn't a legislative power to be able to stop an Australian citizen from entering Australia. So effectively that question goes to, are we breaking the law? And the answer is no.
Why were passports issued now? Because they've been there 7 years. Presumably they've been keen to get home for 7 years. Why now?
Well, applications get made, they take time going through the bureaucracy, they take time going through a whole range of different checks, including security checks. It gets to the point where the bureaucracy decide that by law they have to issue, and they make decisions under law for any application for an Australian passport.
So this is just, when did they apply for the passports?
I don't have that information.
You're seriously saying this is just how it's turned out, that they applied at some point and it's taken this long and now they get the...
This is bureaucrats in the government doing their job.
So over the last 7 years, that just took a long time, and here we are now, they've got passports.
Well, I'm not going to go through the different processes that happen in terms of other agencies that are part of this process. I'm not going to go through that. You understand exactly why I'm not going to go through that.
Well, that's what I can assure you.
But what I can assure you, what I can assure you is the process has happened as a bureaucratic process of officials obeying the law and doing what they are obliged to do by law, with nothing coming from any ministerial level encouraging that process along.
So the bureaucrats and our intelligence agencies coming to the view that now's the time to give them a passport?
Well, the different processes and checks that they had to make are complete, and once all of that's complete by law, they have to issue.
And is part of this to do with the situation on the ground in northern Syria?
I don't see how that would be relevant to their consideration under the Passports Act.
One element would be that the Kurdish and Syrian authorities are planning to shut down that
Yeah, but I don't see how that would be relevant to consideration under the Passports Act. Under the Passports Act, they have specific things they have to take into account. I don't see how that would be relevant.
Okay, so the situation on the ground is not relevant.
Well, I don't see, it's not the Act that I manage, but I don't see how it would be relevant.
Or to your Act when it comes to any security issue here?
No, well, for temporary exclusion orders, it's relevant to the extent that if somebody can't come to Australia, an exclusion order is pretty irrelevant. So for me, once it was clear that people were starting to move, it was at that point that the whole system gets activated and say, okay, do we now need to consider a temporary exclusion order?
What happens if the camp does close?
Well, the people will be in an intolerable position entirely through actions they themselves took, entirely through shocking decisions that those parents made.
Has there been any contact between the Australian government and Kurdish or Syrian authorities about this cohort?
There's been, well, certainly nothing from Home Affairs. There, I don't. It's nothing that I'm involved with. I don't know the answer. Beyond that, I've seen...
You don't know if Foreign Affairs or any of the agencies have been in touch?
Well, there would be different reasons why Foreign Affairs would engage with the Kurdish authorities in different ways in terms of Foreign Affairs relations.
So this report in The Australian yesterday that the local authorities there were warned by Australia that the women and children were terrorists and would not be accepted in Australia. Is that accurate?
Well, what I can say is that is largely a similar view to things that have been said publicly. So I know it made the sort of newsflash in terms of the front page of that particular paper.
Are they terrorists?
This is a very mixed group. Certainly everybody who went there at a time where everyone in the world knew exactly what ISIS was.
No, but right now, are you suggesting they're terrorists? Because a few minutes ago you said they don't pose a threat to
I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm saying, because you've got language issues in that person wasn't reading from an email or anything like that. So, but in terms of the general concept of the article was about Australia not wanting people back, like that's what that article was about.
There was no warning.
You don't need an email. You can Google that. You can find that anywhere. You can listen to the Prime Minister any day of the week for it to be clear that we do not want the individuals in Australia. legally, you can't stop a citizen from entering your country. Legally, if a citizen applies for a passport and the authorities don't think thresholds are reached to be able to block it, then a passport gets issued.
So there was no message to the Syrians or Kurds, don't let these people go?
Well, I've answered that with as much detail as I'm able to give you, David.
Okay, but I'm still a little confused. Was there any message?
Well, no, I've told you that embassies will. I haven't gone through every email of the embassies, okay. So you're asking a question where I've already told you I don't have the answer to that.
Okay. Do any of them have dual citizenship?
There'll be. Look, if I start with this, the majority of them are born in Australia. So overwhelmingly, this is a cohort that's born in Australia. Immigration is a small part of the story of these individuals. Whether the countries they were from would still recognise that citizenship or not is something that I don't know. The one person who I've had a temporary exclusion order over is somebody who's been here for a long time. She arrived when John Howard was Prime Minister, received a citizenship when John Howard was Prime Minister, and went there when Tony Abbott was Prime Minister. Given the country, and I won't give the country that she came from, but given the country that she came from in those circumstances, I'm not sure that they would actually recognise that citizenship.
Okay, but she may have dual citizenship by the sound.
I'm pretty confident they wouldn't recognise that citizenship.
Okay, you talking about Iran?
David.
You're not going to say.
Like seriously.
The reason
I'm giving you as much as I can, but we are talking about some pretty serious national security information that we're talking about here.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking is if it's a dual citizen, there is a provision. I know it's been changed by the High Court, but is there still a provision to strip Australian citizenship?
Yeah, look, there is, but it's not an entirely effective provision.
So that won't apply here?
Well, can I just tell you what happens with that provision?
Yeah.
Because we had one where there was part of the cancellation that had to happen under me, and effectively people are now given notice of the attempt to cancel their citizenship, and we've had one instance where someone just went off and renounced the other, at which point the courts don't let you do it. So those provisions and that entire line of argument that was advanced under the previous government has really hit a constitutional dead end.
Look, I want to ask you, the US has long urged countries like Australia that it should take its citizens back from these camps on security grounds. And your predecessor, Claire O'Neill, made a similar point a few years ago when 4 women and 13 children were brought home in 2022. Here's what she said. The question for us is the safest thing for these 13 children to grow up in a squalid camp where they're subjected to radical ideologies every single day and then return to Australia at some point when they're an adult? Or is it safer for us to bring them here so they can live a life around Australian values? Minister, what's changed since then?
Well, the government's position on the remaining cohort, and as I've said, this is not a cohesive group of people. For the remaining cohort, the government's position has been what it is now for a very long time. Do not forget that one of the not-for-profit groups took the government to court to try to get us to do a repatriation. We fought it and we won. Our position that we would not repatriate these individuals is a long-standing position.
So they're a different group, is what you're saying, to that earlier group?
Well, they're by definition different, and the government's the government's position that we would not repatriate has been a position for a very long time.
Look, I want to show you, these are the images of the Al Roj camp we're talking about. These were taken just in the past week. I mean, and you know, we know the security situation in that region of Syria is deteriorating. What's going to happen to these Australian kids if they're left there?
That's in the hands of their parents. This entire situation.
Doesn't the government have any obligation here?
Well, we are not the people who are holding them there. They're being held there by Kurdish authorities. They're being not allowed over a border by Syrian authorities. They went there against what the Australian government wanted. The government at the time was the coalition. They didn't have an attempt to stop their passports at the critical moment, which could have caused the real protection that we all now wish had happened. And that is why they are there. This is not a situation where you're showing me images where someone is there because Australia has put them there. No, that is not the case.
Beyond this 34, are there other Australians still caught up in any of these camps in Syria?
Well, there have been reports, let me put it in that way, about some of the men who were fighters. And some of the men who were fighters, let's remember that some of them returned under the previous government. So returned in the exact same way that we're talking here. And if you were there as a fighter and you returned, the question that you asked earlier about with respect to terrorism, and under the coalition government, they came in with our agencies watching people as they arrived. Some of the men have now been transferred. It's been reported that Australian men would be among that group.
To Iraq,
and they've been transferred. I beg your pardon?
To Iraq?
To Iraq.
And
yes.
is that correct, that about 13 have gone from a Syrian jail to an Iraqi
Once again, we are not confirming the Australians within that group, which is why I've framed it as there have been reports of.
But you know?
Yeah, of course, there is a lot that you know in these portfolios, David.
Why is that? Why can't you say that?
Because I leave it for our intelligence agencies to determine if they think it's in the national interest for different information to be made public. Okay. When there's things that have been speculated on and it's relevant to the inquiry you've just made, I give you an answer.
Look, I want to move off that issue just briefly. Parliament...
So there's one thing that you haven't touched, which is the front page of today's paper, which I just do need to say that report...
just tell us which report you're talking about.
There's a report on the front page of today's Sunday Telegraph. In that report, it makes a claim that we are conducting a repatriation. We are not. It claims we have been meeting with the states for the purposes of a repatriation. We have not. Our authorities meet with the state authorities to make sure that we are prepared if there is any chance of there being a heightened risk to national security. As soon as the conditions of the camp started to deteriorate and there was a possibility that some people would be getting out, which has happened, some without passports, I might add, who've then turned up to an embassy, at which point you have to give them a passport as well, that the national security teams, the joint counter-terrorism teams, meet as they did under the previous government, as they do now, as is essential for public safety.
Good to clear that up. Parliament passed your new laws to ban hate groups last month. I just wanted to check what's happened since then. Is there progress on banning a particular group yet?
Okay, so there were two groups that had largely been spoken about before that. There were the neo-Nazis and Hizb ut-Tahrir. The neo-Nazis disbanded before the legislation went through. Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is an organisation I've been fighting since my first term in Parliament, back in the days when the Liberal government was rolling out the red carpet for them at the embassy and giving them speaking tour visas in Australia. ASIO have now provided the advice that that organisation meets the threshold that ASIO requires for them to be able to be banned.
Right.
So the next stage is the department now prepares brief for a minister. That brief is the second threshold that has to be determined, and then after that, presuming that that's determined, then the Leader of the Opposition is advised and the Attorney-General has to sign off on it.
Okay, so that could happen.
But the first stage on the process of a prohibited group listing happening for Hizb ut-Tahrir is now complete. The ASIO advice is in.
Okay.
And this is the first time we've been able to ban, potentially, a group which falls short of a terrorist listing. It says you don't have to be specifically calling for violence, but you do have to be acting in a way that increases the risk of communal violence or politically motivated violence.
Okay, and just finally, we've gone long here, but I do appreciate you sticking with us, Tony Burke. Final one, Pauline Hanson's comments on Muslims on Lakemba as well, which sits in your electorate. The Federal Police are now examining what she said about Muslims in particular. What's your view on this? The Senator says the government's trying to put her back in jail, for the record. Is that what's happening here?
I was back in Lakemba on Friday night for the Lakemba night market during Ramadan, and a whole lot of people remembered the last time Pauline Hanson went to Lakemba. She turned up with a TV crew from one of the commercial stations, expecting to be greeted with anger from people. They showed her hospitality. They were really glad she was there. Some of the women gave her a hug. Really blew her mind. And I presume, and afterwards, the security guard she turned up with stayed in the area and went down and had a kebab. I think what is happening here is part of Pauline Hanson frustration with Lakemba is it didn't give her what she wanted. This is a generous community. There's a whole lot of hospitality there and a group of people who are who sadly are becoming used to being demonised. But let me say this, it's not just the cruelty of it. There's a national security angle here as well. We've had a big national discussion about when anti-Semitism becomes normalised, it is more likely you get anti-Semitic violence, as we saw in Brisbane over the last night. That is the same for any form of bigotry, including Islamophobia. And I just say to people, don't pretend you care about national security and then make it harder for our agencies and more likely that violence will occur.
Tony Burke, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you for joining us.
Great to be back
This morning. All right, well, coming up, the battle for Australia's economy as the new Shadow Treasurer's vision of the future starts to take shape. First, let's get back to our panel. We're joined once more by the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age's Niki Savva, the Nine Network's Charles Croucher, and the ABC's Patricia Karvelas. All right, well, a bit to unpack from all of that. Niki, when it comes to the decision to issue passports to this group of 34 women and children, is it clearer now, do you think, why now, why they've been given these passports?
Yes, I do. I think it is a little bit clearer. I mean, it's not entirely within the government's control. A lot of it is to do with the actual conditions on the ground, I think. So, yeah.
Charles, there's a bit of obviously information from the agencies that the minister's not going to reveal about exactly what's gone on here, but his point about the 34 have different levels of risk, and obviously one of them has copped this temporary exclusion order. He's not ruling out others getting a temporary exclusion order either, but they're obviously compiling information constantly.
Yeah, and have been for a while.
Yeah.
The not a coherent cohort is the line that was used throughout. And I think that shows not just why this group of 34 has remained there and others have been brought home, but sort of signifies that maybe there'll be a different approach to each collection or some of the groups. Andrew Probyn reported this week that a third of them, I think, are connected to a Sydney ISIS recruiter. Perhaps those people are treated differently to the other people. And while everyone here is clearly, on the parent side of it, seems to have made a horrific choice, the magnitude and the gravity of those choices are different from person to person. And it's clear this won't be treated while we're all treating, and certainly they're treating this cohort as 34 apparent ISIS brides. In amongst that 34, there are different groups and different levels.
Well, he referred to the state of mind, right?
Yeah.
How do you know someone's state of mind? Well, his very strong implication is that they are monitoring their communications. They're listening to everything they're saying. That's why one has been given the temporary exclusion order. The rest haven't. They're not a threat at this stage, but he's waiting for more information. The message he's sending is that there is high-level surveillance on these women, and there's a reason that they're sending that message. It's to Australians. We're watching every single thing they're saying because there is a heightened paranoia in this country. Let's not forget Bondi happened at the end of last year. The context here matters, I think. The
context over there matters too. And just to explain to people what's going on, we're in a pocket of northern Syria where the Kurds have controlled it, but now the Syrians under the new regime is trying to re-establish total control. So you've got decisions being taken on this camp, and we read overnight that both the Kurds and Syrians have agreed they want to shut down this camp, and it would seem pretty soon. And it is very unclear what happens then, right? I mean, you're talking about a whole, not just the Australians, but a whole group of ISIS families. Where do they go? Are they, and particularly Australians, what happens to them?
Well, obviously, if they can find the means, they will make their way back to Australia. And I think what he was, my impression from what was being said was, yes, there are women in that group who did actually go over there and sign up for the cause, but there were probably a few young women who just made really stupid choices. They might not have committed any kind of crime. So these things, these women have to be judged separately, individually, according to why they went and what they've done while they've been there. So that means that when they get home, they can't all be treated the same.
Which is also how they would be judged at home if they are arrested and face the courts here.
Yeah.
Individual cases with individual facts that would be explored.
But you look at the change in our politics, if I can sort of broaden this out. I mean, I've been around long enough to remember the David Hicks kind of story. Like, we were in a context where the citizenship of Australians, Julian Assange, and I'm not implying he's in the same sort of category, but Australians who did do the wrong things have historically been provided, I think, a cover that we don't see anymore. Politics has shifted to the right on these issues. The toughening of the language from Labor, I think, is expressly linked to the toughening of our politics on these issues, because the lack of sympathy for some of these women who, clearly some of them have been coerced, were stupid, uneducated, like just you can do a list, and yet there is absolutely zero sympathy for them broadly, I think, in our political establishment.
The kids, right? The kids.
Like, like literal babies who are now being punished for the sins of their idiotic parents, which is, you know, like hard to kind of swallow.
Oh, it's a good point.
Well, David Hicks, adult male, went over and allegedly fought with a terrorist organisation, got caught by the Americans, did a plea deal admitting to supporting terrorist organisations, was repatriated by the Howard government.
By a right-wing government.
By the Howard government, brought back, served out, you know, the remainder of his sentence, which was a very short period of time, and then was allowed to be free. Now, why should his treatment be so accommodating and yet be so harsh against these?
Yeah, there has to be that recognition to what you said about there being charges at this end. There has to be just this end, because naturally anyone hears that, knows what these kids have been through, know what the women been through, would think, I don't want them living next door to me and my kids. So there has to be that acknowledgement there is justice waiting for them back here.
And that's where the Claire O'Neill comments, I'm sorry, that was rude, but when she was Home Affairs Minister, when she brought a different cohort, because I think he's right, you can't homogenise the whole group. That's just stupid, right? Like they're all different.
The point is a principal point about, are they better off in a squalid camp being radicalised?
Well, she said they could be radicalised there. It's we can.
The US has been making this point under both Biden and Trump. Countries have to take these people back, otherwise ISIS will regenerate.
Because you have to think about radicalisation and terror beyond just your borders, right? This is a broader problem we have across the world.
Let's move on. The opposition unveiled a new shadow ministry during the week, including an all-new economic lineup, and it came as the government battled more bad news on the finance front.
Today marks a fresh beginning.
There's a cost of living and a cost of small business crisis. Hope is on the way.
He should be let absolutely nowhere near a budget.
Jim Chalmers needs to end his denial about what's driving inflation.
Former RBA Governor Philip Lowe weighed in, accusing the government of fuelling inflation and rate hikes.
Phil Lowe would have liked to have been reappointed by the government.
Phil Lowe, the footballer, former Manly player or former RBA Governor.
After he wasn't reappointed by the government, he's become a fairly persistent critic.
You have people who are exes who get their name in the paper.
Real wages have gone backwards for the first time since September 2023.
With inflation higher than we'd like, that has implications for the real wages calculation.
The response from the Treasurer is cute. Australians are living the consequences of the Albanese inflation agenda.
We'll get to real wages. Just some thoughts on the shadow ministry that Angus Taylor has put forward. It's a significant change. He's rewarded backers. That always happens. So it's a more conservative lineup. But Tim Wilson, as the shadow treasurer, has been getting plenty of attention, and he's got plenty of energy straight out of the blocks, talking about things like how the Reserve Bank's tackling inflation and the top tax rate being too high and so on. What have you made of his performance so far there, Pika?
Look, he had a bit of a, he went out there a little hard, I think, on the question of the way the RBA tackles inflation in terms of having full employment as one of their dual mandates. And then he got slapped down essentially by Jane Hume on my program, but also Angus Taylor avoiding the question. So that story, right, his first hit out tells the story of Tim Wilson. It's a good and a bad story. It's good in so much as he's bold, he wants to go places, put things out there, he's not lazy, but equally he got a little tripped up, right? I think he's a smart choice because he has boundless energy, he's obsessed with the economy. That's novel, isn't it? He doesn't want to just talk about culture wars.
And prepared to say something.
Prepared to come up with ideas. However,
even if they're wrong.
Well, you saw a little bit of maybe where it might become a problem, where he said something and then, of course, the union movement right onto it. They want to increase unemployment. You could just see the scare campaign develop. So good and bad. But I think Angus Taylor knew that in appointing Tim Wilson. At least he has a fighter, and I reckon Jim Chalmers is a little nervous.
Yeah, Niki?
Well, I agree with most of what Patricia had to say. So high value, but also high risk.
Right.
He is obviously a bit of a loose cannon at times. He has an incredible ability to get under people's skin, and not just on the government side, on his own side as well. But he can be incredibly effective.
Yeah. Andrew Hastie's back, Jacinda Nampijinpa Price is back, Claire Chandler's given a big job in shadow finance. There are some big personalities now in that front bench, Charles.
Yeah, you don't want too much talk for the chassis, do you? Because that becomes a problem if there is too much personality going on there. But
main character vibes.
Main character energy. It's a young focus as well. And Jane Hume belled the cat in that first first press conference where she said it's deliberately young because disproportionately it's younger Australians or people in that age bracket that Tim Wilson, Claire Chandler and younger fall into that are copping it from this economy. So there is an element of that as well.
They need to back that up with policy,
change.
though.
Well, of course,
really
at least your visuals change from what is becoming a party that's increasingly for older Australians, or so it seems by the voting data we've seen from the last two elections.
I think it was broadly a smart reshuffle, though. I think he has to be given credit for even the fact that he did elevate Tim Wilson. Like, Tim Wilson even walked in with Susan Lee, who's a key moderate in that. Andrew Hastie doesn't just get this role of industry and sovereign capability, which, by the way, I'm so intrigued by, because as I hope people watched my Four Corners on Monday, I think the ideological divide on the economic questions are huge. So I'm like, how's that going to look? Is he going to be doing protectionism? Is he going to come up with policies
picking
for
winners?
These are the internal tensions, right?
And they're not just personality.
And not just personality, but yes, they started off very well, but we haven't got to the nitty-gritty yet. We haven't got to the immigration policy, for instance, and we don't know how they're going to strike out on the economy or what sovereign capability means.
No, and the pressure will be there to come up with some of that fairly promptly with a by-election looming. That's going to be a real test for them. Look, on the economy, though, there was good news on unemployment. It remained pretty low at 4.1%, but the data on real wages, not so good. Labor did campaign, of course, really hard on lifting real wages in 2022 when it came to office. And we did get a couple of years of real wage growth, but last year, won't surprise many, the official data this week confirmed last year real wages went backwards. That's wages not keeping up with prices. It's another reminder of the need to get inflation down. How much of a concern should this be for Labor?
It should be the number one concern. I mean, voters consistently said that the cost of living is the number one issue, and you saw there was that one bump in interest rates from the February meeting, and the Resolve poll this week had cost of living, again, still far and away the most important issue, but it had jumped. So all the talk of immigration, all the talk of healthcare, what happened in Bondi, national security, and it still took just one interest rate rise to see a 5-point jump in the cost of living. If there's 2 or 3 of those, if real wages don't pick up, that's going to keep going higher and higher, and that's where parties of grievances can get more fruitful, because there's you hunt where the ducks are at, and all of a sudden there's more ducks.
Donald Trump, I want to just briefly mention what's happened there over the last couple of days. So he suffered a big defeat in the US Supreme Court over his tariffs, and look, he's taken it very calmly, very respectfully,
very chill.
Very chill. No, he's absolutely gone after the Supreme Court judges, and overnight posted this on Truth Social. I, as President of the United States of America, will be, effective immediately, raising the 10% worldwide tariff on countries, many of which have been ripping the US off for decades without retribution until I came along, to the fully allowed and legally tested 15% level. So this means for Australia, on face value, I mean, there hasn't been a lot of analysis of this, this has only happened overnight, we'll go from a 10% tariff, which we keep being told is the lowest in the world, to now a 15% tariff, and I think steel and aluminium still 25%. I guess everyone's still digesting what that's going to mean, but we lose any competitive or comparative advantage here, Charles?
Yeah, because the countries we compete against, in particular places like Argentina and Brazil on the beef front, their tariffs go from higher rates back down. So we had that competitive advantage, it's gone. Plus we lose any advantage against the US. The only thing to bear in mind is that last time this happened, the prices of hamburgers went up and Donald Trump eventually did a U-turn and dropped the tariffs altogether.
And that's the thing with Trump. There might be a U-turn tomorrow, next week. It's very hard to know.
To know, yes. Well, Don Farrell is taking off for the US on Tuesday. So hopefully, good timing, coincidental, but hopefully we'll be able to get an idea of what might be happening. But, who knows with Trump. But the other thing is on this, that in a perverse kind of way, it might help Australia in the negotiations with the EU over a free trade agreement. I mean, there might be a greater willingness now to send a message to the US that a large part of the globe still believes in free trade. And
that is very, very high on Don Farrell's list of things to do.
It is.
He wants to nail that.
But the fact that Trump's been able to apply, until the Supreme Court ruling, these punitive tariffs, much higher on certain countries, this has been the big stick, Charles, that he's used in his approach to foreign diplomacy, particularly when it comes to China. Is that big stick though now looking a little?
Well, it is.
Flimsy?
It's not quite as big, right?
No.
It's only 15%. The other thing that the provision he's using has a cap of 150 days.
Right.
So we're going to get to 150 days and have to see what Plan C is. Now, whether that is legislation or another rolling chat, we don't know. And that's what Don Farrell, what administrators everywhere are going to work out, trying to work out what is Plan C, what is Plan D, is he going to cling to this?
And he's got the midterm elections
right
coming
around
up
that
as
time.
well, so that will have an impact.
But also in Australia's context, what's also changed, and we'll find this fascinating the next time the PM faces questions about this, is, remember he didn't have his number and it was all very, hilarious that Peter Dutton, made a lot of it during the election. I know that was a while ago, but PM does have his number now. They have got sort of a nice little bromance of sorts. So I think that relationship is useful too. Kevin Rudd's moving on, but the PM has built some kind of relationship with Trump. It'll be interesting to see how he leverages it.
And keep an eye on Mark Carney, because he has indicated a willingness. It was one of these sort of unexplored lines of that Davos speech, trying to join this middle power trading alliance with the EU and the Pacific and Canada, and he's out here in a couple of weeks.
Here in a couple of weeks. I think we've got a minute left for this one. Formerly known as the Prince, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor spends his 66th birthday being hauled into the police station for 11 hours of grilling over, well, technically his role as trade envoy and I guess handling government documents and so on. Look, the debate now has gone to he's lost his titles, but he is still 8th in line to the throne. The British government apparently thinking about legislating to remove him from the line of succession. Hasn't been a clamour yet from Australia. Well, what's going to happen there, do you think, Niki? Would we wait?
Well, I think if the British move, and they will have to ask Commonwealth countries whether they agree, I cannot see any reason why Australia would say, oh no, we think you should stay.
But would we move before the Brits? Would we move before the Brits?
I don't think so. I don't think that would happen. I think that we would wait for the Brits to take their action and then go along with that.
Given Starmer is fighting for his own political survival, you'd think if I was him, just giving some political advice from down under, I'd be like, emergency sitting of Parliament. I'd be changing that. And the King would be very happy with that too. Has he not thrown his brother under the bus as he tries to save the monarchy? Yeah. Seriously, you don't want this guy anywhere near you.
No, he's made it very clear there's going to be no special protection there at all. All right, our panel, Patricia, Karvelas, Charles Crouch and Niki Savva back very shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with the #1 talking pictures fan of the one and only Zoe Norton-Lodge. Welcome, #1.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Lovely David Rowe cartoon, A Dog's Breakfast with Pauline.
I feel like she's giving Fran Fine energy here. Yeah. Like this could be a scene from The Nanny. Don't you think her walking in? Oh, Mr. Taylor.
It's always the details with David Rowe. I love the four-poster bed here, which is John Howard and Tony Abbott. And the poles, of course, are in the bedpan.
Yes, they are. And I think a doctor might have to look at it because he could be pissing orange sometime soon.
Lovely Brett Lethbridge. It's channeling the Olympics, of course. Yeehaw.
Now stick the landing.
Landing? As the policy X marks the spot there.
Yes. Look, he hasn't landed yet, but I'm not sure it's going to land well.
Jess Harwood has got a large wish list here, and they're sort of joining the dots. So we either need to be different to or the same as Susan Lee, Andrew Hastie, Peter Dutton, Scott Morrison, One Nation and the National Party and Trump.
Simple. So bad immigration.
Yeah.
Be open-minded on nuclear.
Yeah.
Youth crime. You know, like if they do want to do something about youth crime, though, they should just ban 6-7. I would appreciate that.
I would
very
appreciate
much.
it too.
Yeah.
Zoe, Megan Herbert here, channeling Matt Groening from The Simpsons.
Yes.
who's looking at nuclear power and gets electrocuted.
Yes.
And then Susan Ley, November 2025, and now Angus Taylor.
I do think it's nice, kind of touching that he's touching a nuclear reactor, because it might be the closest he'll ever get to touching power.
Beautiful David Rosa with Politics Now Take One, and he's channeling Apocalypse Now.
He is.
Angus here with his little nuclear hat.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
But look, I agree with the director. Cut Apocalypse Now featuring the demise of the Liberal Party, not quite as compelling, perhaps.
I quite like the smell of racism in the morning.
Yes, I know. I suppose in this analogy, Pauline Hanson is Agent Orange.
Yeah, I'd say so. Matt Golding, you can't out Pauline, but you can out dog whistle someone who doesn't even bother to dog whistle. Angus, the door must be shut.
Yeah.
Isn't that just a lovely analogy?
Yeah.
Shutting the door.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Kathy Wilcox is got good immigrants and bad immigrants, the good, the bad and the smugly. Well, we don't want the kinds of people that come from repressive terrorist regimes.
You mean the people most likely to need somewhere safe to flee to?
Yeah.
I know.
It's not so much the white Australia as the right Australia policy. Meanwhile, in Victoria, Zoe, claims of CFMEU corruption. Jacinta Allen here with the little IBAC pooch.
Yes. Yes, we do. Time to release the corruption watchdog.
Yeah, it's more of a, not so much a bloodhound as a dud hound, I'd say.
I don't know if you've ever seen a woman in a pantsuit with a miniature poodle interact, but they are intimidating.
Scary.
Yes.
Finally, Matt Golding, the taxpayers' bill is a $100 billion leave a tip for the bikies and criminals and select 15%.
Yeah, I mean, this just reminds me of going out for dinner in Sydney.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you've charged me $100 billion and now you want a 15% tip?
So it's been an absolute pleasure unpicking events this week, and thank you for being the #1 fan.
Oh, always. Back to you, Spearsy.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations. PK.
The Royal Commission into Anti-Semitism and Social Cohesion starts Tuesday, and I'm going to be looking pretty closely at what Commissioner Virginia Bell will be saying when she outlines in the opening the parameters and the interpretation of the kind of things that they'll be looking at. Because, for instance, I interviewed, I'll just say this briefly, the Minister for Indigenous Australians, and said, yep, I've encouraged Aboriginal people to put in submissions as well. So that broadening out how broader it is in terms of the social cohesion question, there is space for that. It's really fascinating to watch.
Yeah. Charles.
As a kid that grew up in the Hunter and did the trip to Sydney lots and lots, I've taken particular interest in the very fast train proposal between Sydney and Newcastle. Big development coming early this week on that front, probably Tuesday as well. The one thing that's different to all the other very fast trains we've heard about throughout our lifetimes is that it's not an election year. Let's hope that means there's going to be progress.
Yeah, right. Good luck with that.
Hope springs eternally.
In the lead up to the leadership spill, the Liberals, there was a lot of war gaming going on by politicians of all sides, and one of the wilder options that both sides landed on was that if Taylor crashed and burned was followed by Hastie, who crashed and burned, then the Liberals would vote for Josh Frydenberg to be their leader post-election, a la what happened with Campbell Newman in Queensland years ago. The only problem there is that Frydenberg would have to win Kooyong back from Monique Ryan, and in this climate, I think he'd be pushing the proverbial uphill.
Niki drops a bomb right at the end there. So the active conversation about recruiting Josh from outside the Parliament, still an option.
Last resort, but.
All right, one to watch. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Finally, no group chat between workers ever once the boss involved, and as Health Minister Mark Butler found out, that's probably for good reason. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
I had an idea and I wanted to circulate with the health ministers, and one of the state health ministers said, "Oh, just put it on the WhatsApp group." What WhatsApp group? Yeah, you're not on that, sorry. That's our WhatsApp group, where we just bitch about you.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.